Like no other video I have ever tried to do in my short career doing videos have I struggled as I have struggled with this one. This is about my fourth attempt to make a video on a game that I love so much, perhaps too much. Maybe I just can't do a video of it. I don't know. But I need to try because I got to move on. And just want to say that the overview of the game, for those of you who don't know, but probably if you're watching this, you do know, this is a paragraph-based game, and I'm showing you the outside of the paragraph booklet here. In effect, in the most broad strokes, what you're doing is you are moving hex by hex on a map and looking up on a card to determine whether you have activated any unit on the other side and the corresponding paragraph that you are then directed to read if you do activate a unit, and you go from there. I mean, in its broadest way, that's what the game is. You move, you look up, and if you get a number, you go to this paragraph booklet and basically see what happens next. As we look here at some of the counters in the game, I'll point out what they represent, and we'll slowly learn to understand how this game is played. Here is a, actually I don't know what this one is. Here's a radar, a rocket, that's a downed plane. This is an antenna. This is some rubble and destroyed buildings. And we have some ammo here. We've got a radio. We've got a satchel charge. This is 45, and this is the well, the back of the counter show the jam of it. And we have booby traps and minefields, and we've got some cars. This is just a partial indication of some of the counters. These create the story. So the way this game works, which is, if you've watched my video on Mosby's Raiders, it is a very similar system in terms of how the turns go. There are two types of parts to a turn. There's operations and rounds. And in effect, operations is when you are traveling through the map. In this case, it is a village. Every hex you move into, you move one hex at a time. You do a lookup of a paragraph lookup in the paragraph booklet to determine whether or not there is any event that occurs in that hex. You have these event markers that has, if there is an event in the hex, you leave the marker there so you know the next time you go through it, that event has already happened. In many cases, nothing happens, and you continue to move around, and there are many things that you can do during operations, which is essentially doing exploration and other things like changing your position or stance, because you can be standing, you can be crouching, you can also be prone and lying down as indicated by the prone marker. You can be moving, you can be clearing jammed weapons, all sorts of things that if you just put your mind into the fact that you're actually in this village here, creeping around, trying not to be noticed by the Germans, you would be able to do. Once you do a check on a hex and it activates a German unit, then the turn moves into something called rounds. And in rounds, there are restrictions on what you can do. There are movement point allowances and other things. And of course, there is combat. And these counters that I showed you at the beginning here become revealed as the story unfolds. As you read the paragraphs, maybe it's describing a plane that has crashed, and you'll then go and check that out. Or you will discover something like the radar or an antenna or a rocket. It is just a little hard to convey how effective this game is in depicting what it means to wait and to creep and to move slowly and to hope that you can continue to advance with basically nothing happening. Because as you move into each hex and you check on the hex, you get, you hope in a way, an answer of none. Nothing happens and you can continue on. But then all of a sudden, you're going to have an activation. You're going to discover, you're going to activate a German unit, and he will fire on you, and he is firing on you from a woods hex, and right after he fires, he goes prone. So he's lying there in the woods, far away from you, and then you are all of a sudden out of the blue faced with that situation. And that's really the core of what happens in this game. There is nothing, 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 and then there is something. And the feeling of being surprised, of course, the game's called Ambush, so what do you expect? But the feeling of surprise that the narrative of the game, the structure of the game engenders is something that I think is hard to duplicate in any other game. Certainly, it is coming from the paragraph-driven system, and naturally, the downside to that is if you're going to sit down and play this exact scenario again, where you are, for example, entering here in a limited number of hexes, this is scenario 1, should you enter this hex again, it's going to trigger this German again, this will happen again. So that, of course, is the, often discussed downside, the limitation of this game. But for what it is, playing fresh, which is why I'm not really showing you or walking through any type of scenario, it is just unsurpassed. So why have I struggled so much to talk about this game? Why have I been sitting down at my desk trying to play it, getting up, walking around, just making a big mess of things, and just ultimately not really knowing how to present this game? I think part of the reason is, as we take a look at an abandoned video segment where I was going to take you through some of the German cards and go over what they represent. I mean, honestly, it doesn't really matter. You're either going to buy this game or not, and it doesn't matter if I tell you what's on the German cards. This is a game where the interactivity that you have with the system, because of the way the system is designed, is so intense and so immersive that it is like being inside a novel. It is like being inside a story. And the best way that I had to think about this game was by turning to writers and writers about literature and writers of stories. And that's why I put those quotes up, because to me, they really get to the essence of what this game is and why this game becomes so meaningful, even though you are looking at the most basic of graphic design that you could possibly get. I mean, that's like barely 2 colors. So at the end here, final thoughts on this game. Let me start with the negative. This game is somewhat hard to come by. It is not cheap if you find it used, and it is not particularly quick to learn. The rules actually, I think, are, this is a copy of the rule book. It's not the actual rule book, which I try to preserve, because these definitely are rules that you need to go back to a lot, or at least I do. What you get to do, there's a lot of flexibility, as I described, the actions, the operations and rounds way of structuring this game gives you a lot of freedom, especially, and it is intuitive. If you're imagining yourself, as I said earlier, hiding out in a village or whatever, what might you be doing to avoid detection? And of course, the combat-related actions, once you are in rounds, certainly make sense. There are different ways of firing. There's close combat. There's different types of ammunition that you have, grenades, bazookas, and things like that. But they all come with pretty specific and detailed, this is sort of an example of line of sight. I should probably be showing you the actual rules booklet because it is in 2 color, but of course I can't find it here right now. But you can get bogged down a little bit, I think, in this, how you clear a jammed weapon, how you prepare a charge, what happens to something when you're throwing it. There's a little bit of danger of that, I find, especially when you're starting out. And one of the issues here is, for example, a description of, just look briefly here to see what the paragraph, you're given a paragraph description at the beginning of each of the missions. There are 8 missions in the base game, and then there are a number of different expansions that have been published or that were published after the base game. I only have one of them right now, which is Move Out. This was not the first expansion. There are 4 additional modules in this game. I think Purple Heart was the one immediately published after, which came with new maps and things. Move Out does not actually have any new maps. It has simply new paragraph booklet and the accompanying apparatus to use it. Anyway, back to what I was saying. There is a little bit of a risk, I think, when you're playing this game. It is a slow pace. It can be a slow pace because you're agonizing, not only over every decision in terms of where you're initially moving, but then once you move, you do your check to see if something has happened. You're doing a check to see if your other squad members are aware of what's happening. And then you have decisions to make once you enter the rounds as to which of your men will be acting first. If you have men with the same initiative, you can choose who goes first and what they do. There is a long list of things that they can do during rounds that are, a lot of combat related, but you can also pick up and exchange equipment. A commander can give his turn to somebody else. I haven't even talked about the vehicles that enter. I don't think they're in the first scenario, but they're in the rest of the scenarios. It's detailed. It's an investment. It's an investment of time and certainly of money to obtain a copy of the game at this point. Is it worth it? Well, of course, I think that for the solo player, even if you are not interested in this theme, because honestly, in a way, even though it's so detailed and it does take place in sort of some abstract, World War II combat, and you have the description of the village and the scenario, and you're fighting the Germans, in a sense, the whole thing is abstracted because you are creating this story in your mind with the aid of the paragraphs. And when you're waiting for something to happen, when something does happen and it startles you, that is a feeling and it is an emotion, and it is removed, I think, at least for me, from the specific historical aspect of the game. But of course, it is a World War II game. So if you're interested in the theme of World War II, if you are interested certainly in solo play, if you're a committed solo player, I would say certainly a committed solo wargamer, you probably already have played this game. You probably already own it or have come across it at some point. If you haven't, definitely it is worth the effort to obtain. If you are a committed solo player who plays heavy games, who's not afraid of depth and some commitment to learning rules that can be somewhat intricate at points, I would say definitely look into this game. It is unique. Watching a playthrough is a risky proposition in a way because the replayability of the game, I won't lie, I don't think it is there. I mean, they say even at the beginning of the rules somewhere, I don't know if I can find it quickly, but it does tell you that somewhere, basically, this isn't that replayable. And they're right. Here we go. Each ambush mission can be played only once because after playing it, its plot, characters, and mysteries. However, we have found that if you return to a mission long after you've played it the first time, it has some replay value due to the frailty of human memory. Do not depend on this, however, since you might just remember anyway. And of course, that is ultimately my message of this game, that I do remember it. Do I remember the story? No. Do I remember the feeling? Absolutely. And at the end of the day, for me as a gamer, that's what I want. I want a feeling. I want a memory that is emotional, and at this point, I'm hanging on to the game. I would never part with this game, but I am hoping for the day when my youngest will be old enough to begin to create this story for herself.